Book 3. Chapter 6. The Sacrifice. The roar was a physical force, a wave of sound that struck the clearing and shattered the world. It tore through the thin veil of courage Zira had wrapped around herself, leaving her exposed and utterly, primordially terrified. Her limbs turned to lead, her breath catching in her throat like a shard of ice. Her mind, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone, screamed run, flee, escape. But her body was a statue of stone and fear. The dragon, a magnificent and horrifying creature of emerald scales and ancient fury, perched atop the crumbling tower, a monarch surveying its kingdom. Zira stood rooted to the earth, her body betraying her mind's desperate commands.
Run! Hide! Flee!
But her muscles had turned to stone, refusing every panicked signal her brain sent them. Cold sweat beaded across her skin as her gaze darted from the magnificent, terrible creature to Doreen, when seeking the quickest path to cover, had slipped into the dilapidated shack at the tower's base. She had not found a sanctuary. She had invaded a lair.
Oh my God! The nest! We've disturbed the nest!
The realization hit Zira with sickening clarity. Dragons were territorial by nature, but nothing provoked their wrath like an intruder in their private domain. The serpentine head swiveled towards the shack, emerald scales catching the light as its pupils narrowed to venomous slits. Its focus was singular, predatory, fixed entirely on Doreen. The primal fury of a dragon whose domain had been violated was a thing of legend, a force that could unmake mountains and boil seas. Now that incandescent rage, a furnace of possessive wrath, was focused entirely on Doreen. To the astonishment of everyone, and perhaps even to herself, Doreen stepped back out from the shack's shadowed maw. She raised her hands, palms open, a gesture of peace that seemed absurdly fragile against the backdrop of such monstrous power.
"Hold on now,"
she yelled, her voice straining for a nonchalance it could not possibly possess.
"Big misunderstanding. No reason to get your scales in a twist."
The dragon paused, a moment that stretched into eternity. Then, with terrible grace, it descended from the rooftop. Each beat of its massive wings stirred dust and debris, the gust strong enough to make them all shield their eyes. It landed with surprising delicacy, mere feet from Doreen, lowering its head until they were nearly face to face. Black gas hissed from its nostrils, coiling ominously in the air between them. Not far from Doreen, Karma had pressed himself into the lee of the tower's stone base, hoping the shadows would render him invisible. But the dragon's descent had brought it impossibly close, its flank a moving wall of iridescent green scales. He didn't dare move, not a finger, not a breath, but he readied himself to bolt the moment the beast struck at Doreen. Doreen stared into ancient eyes that had witnessed centuries pass like fleeting seasons. For a heartbeat, it seemed her audacity might have earned her a reprieve. Then something shifted in the dragon's gaze, the moment a predator decides only to kill. The pretense of diplomacy evaporated, replaced by raw, frantic survival.
"Shit,"
she whispered, then bolted for the forest. She didn't look back. She threw herself toward the tree line, a desperate, scrambling flight that ended in a headfirst dive behind a moss-covered log. She curled into a tight ball, hands clamped over her head, as though such a flimsy barrier might offer protection against dragon's poison. Zira became distantly aware that her legs were inching backward of their own accord, drawing her away from the creature. Her rational mind knew the movement was futile. If the dragon wanted her, this pathetic retreat wouldn't save her, but her body seemed determined to try anyway. A cold sweat, slick and chilling, beaded on her skin. She had no more control over her body than a puppet whose strings had been cut. But Ilara moved with purpose. His eyes were clear, utterly unburdened by fear. Or perhaps, more accurately, he was so lost in his own fractured reality that the dragon was merely another phantom in his personal hell. He remembered only Zira's desperate plea, a girl imprisoned, a soul that needed saving. With a strange, unnerving serenity, he broke from the tree line and dashed toward the shack's open door. Zira wanted to rescue someone. Nothing else mattered. The dragon's head whipped around, its golden eyes locking onto the new movement, its jaws snapping with lightning speed. Ilara, with a dancer's uncanny grace, sidestepped the attack, the massive teeth closing on empty air just inches from his head. He slipped past the beast and into the darkness of the shack. The room was small, filled with the debris of ages, but against the far wall was another door, a heavy wooden door leading into the tower proper. He threw his shoulder against it, the wood groaning in protest. Outside, Karma watched with wide eyes as the dragon's sinuous body folded in on itself, contorting to follow Ilara into the confines of the shack. The structure groaned under the creature's weight, timbers creaking in protest as its bulk forced its way inside. For a moment all was still, then black vapor seeped from every crack and crevice in the walls, a toxic cloud seeking escape. Inside, Ilara felt the dragon's breath engulf him, a caustic mist that scorched his lungs and set his very blood afire. His vision swam, darkness encroaching from the edges as he fumbled blindly for the door. The poison burned through him like liquid flame, searing his throat and chest from within. His lungs seized, refusing to draw breath, and consciousness began to slip away like water through cupped hands. Then, miraculously, the poisonous cloud began to thin. Ilara gasped, dragging precious air into his burning lungs. The pain was exquisite, but it anchored him to consciousness. Every vein in his body seemed to pulse with unnatural strength, a final, desperate surge of vitality. He grabbed the door again and crashed through it with his full weight, tumbling into the tower beyond. Karma steeled himself and rushed to the shack entrance, sword drawn. Through the doorway he caught a glimpse of Ilara somehow broken through the inner door, into the tower. Without thinking, he swung his blade at the dragon's exposed tail, a panicked, futile scratch against a mountain. The creature whirled with shocking speed, eyes blazing with hatred. Karma stumbled backward around the building's corner, heart hammering against his ribs. From her cover, Doreen fumbled an arrow onto her bowstring. Her hands trembled so violently she could barely draw it. She let the arrow fly, a wild, unaimed shot toward the shack's dark maw. Less a tactical decision and more a desperate prayer, a gesture of solidarity for the man being devoured within. Balin's stonehammer alone seemed immune to the fear that gripped his companions. From his position further down the path, he watched, unmoved. The potent venom of a green dragon held little terror for one of his stout blood. He watched the unfolding chaos, the panicked scrambling, the futile gestures with narrowed eyes and a grim smile. A dragon, a worthy foe at last.
"I'll have that hide for my wall,"
he muttered, drawing his great sword with a metallic hiss.
"Maybe I'll let it beg before I end it."
The magic of his ancestors awakened at his call, coursing through him like molten metal. His form swelled and stretched until he stood twice the height of a man, muscles bulging beneath his armor. With a thunderous battle cry, he charged toward the shack, each footfall shaking the earth. Ilara stumbled into the tower's core and found nothing. The structure was a hollow shell, a stone cylinder open to the sky. The roof was gone, the inner floors and stairs long since rotted away to dust. He stood in the center of the ruin, his head whipping around, frantically scanning the bare stone walls for any sign of a cell, a cage, a prisoner. But there was nothing, only rubble and the encroaching wilderness. And then the dragon was upon him again. It lunged from the doorway, a whirlwind of claws and fangs. It was no longer hunting, it was exterminating, a furious, vengeful god intent on eradicating the pest that had defiled its sanctum. Ilara, moving with that same detached, otherworldly grace, dodged and weaved, his blades a blur as he deflected the furious onslaught. It was Doreen's scream that finally broke Zyra's spell.
By the gods, it's killing Alara.
Zyra's muscles unlocked all at once, responding to her will again. She fumbled at her belt pouch, withdrew a small vial, and downed its contents in a single gulp. The potion of climbing took effect immediately, sending a tingling sensation through her fingertips. Without wasting another moment, she rushed to the tower's exterior wall and began to scale it, fingers and toes finding purchase in the smallest cracks between stones. Ilara feinted left, then darted right, making for the exit, only to find his path blocked by Balin's massive form attempting to enter the doorway. For a crucial moment, they were both trapped, neither able to advance. The dragon seized its opportunity, exhaling another cloud of poison, thick and potent, filled the chamber, engulfing both Ilara and Balin. For Ilara, already weakened and his lungs raw, it was too much. His strength gave out, his senses dissolving into a painless, welcome darkness. He collapsed to the stone floor, unconscious. Balin, however, merely grimaced as the poison washed over him. His dwarven blood gave him resilience against such toxins and allowed him to weather the venomous storm. He grunted, shaking his massive head as if shrugging off a pesky insect. The dragon, sensing a more formidable opponent, beat its wings and rose to the tower's open roof beyond Balin's reach.
"Coward!"
Balin bellowed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. He backed into the shack where Karma had reappeared, intent on reaching the fallen Ilara. Before either could act, the dragon's head appeared in the doorway once more, unleashing another torrent of poisonous breath. Karma threw himself backward, managing to stay just beyond the cloud's deadly reach, but Balin stood his ground, weathering the assault with stubborn determination. The dragon withdrew again, returning to its perch atop the ruined tower. Zira reached the top of the wall, hauling herself over with aching arms. Her eyes swept the open space desperately, searching for any sign of the prisoner she'd been so certain existed. But there was no prisoner, no captive elven girl. No one could be hiding here. The tower was empty, a hollow shell. Just as she processed this cruel truth, the dragon rose before her, its emerald scales shimmering and wings unfurled in all their terrible glory. Panic seized her anew. She scrambled back down the wall, fingers slipping on the stone in her haste. As she descended, her gaze caught movement on the distant path. A robed figure approaching the tower, the distinctive looks of Tiamat cultists, even at this distance. Her blood turned to ice.
Another cultist. Gods help us.
They were caught between the dragon and its new allies, with no escape route in sight. Inside the shack, Balin reached a grim conclusion. He would never reach the dragon while it maintained its aerial advantage. He rushed back outside, seeking a better position. Karma, meanwhile, knelt beside Ilara. A soft, silver light enveloped Ilara, knitting his poisoned flesh back together. Ilara's eyes fluttered open. He was dazed, his gaze unfocused. He pushed himself up, his eyes finding Karma's. He grabbed the paladin by the collar of his chainmail, his grip surprisingly strong.
"You must take Eli.
He rasped, his voice a broken whisper.
Take her to safety, to Neverwinter."
A racking cough seized him, and he spat a spray of blood onto Karma's face. Then, his strength gone, he collapsed back to the ground.
"Pull yourself together!"
Karma shouted, wiping the blood from his cheek with disgust. A shadow fell across the doorway. The dragon had returned, but this time it didn't exhale its poisonous breath. Instead, with the giant dwarf gone, it lunged forward with fang and claws. Its talons, each one a curved dagger of black keratin, slammed down, crushing Elara beneath them. A low groan escaped the elf's lips, a final exhalation of pain, and then he was still. Simultaneously, the dragon's head darted forward, venomous teeth sinking into Karma's arm. White-hot pain shot through him, the toxins spreading through his veins like liquid fire. Karma glanced down at Elara's motionless form beneath the dragon's claws. In that moment, a cold calculation took place within his mind. The elf was lost. His life was not worth dying for. He was a liability, a broken soldier who could no longer serve. Perhaps his death could serve one final purpose. Karma ripped his arm free from the dragon's maw and bolted. He ran from the shack, chasing after Balin, leaving Elara's body behind. He didn't look back. Let the beast feast, a dark part of his mind whispered. Let it sate its hunger on him and leave the rest of us be. That single act of calculated abandonment shattered what little remained of the party's morale. It was no longer a fight. It was a rout. Doreen, seeing Karma flee, knew all was lost. She scrambled up from behind her log, sprinted deeper into the woods, and, without hesitation, leaped from the edge of a small, rocky cliff, tumbling down the scree-covered slope to escape. Karma was right behind her, following her path down the cliffside. Zyra, clinging to the tower wall, saw them go. She dropped the last few feet to the ground and followed the sound of Balin's charge. The dwarf had met the lone cultist head-on. There was a brief, violent clash of steel, a flurry of movement, and then the cultist, wisely choosing to live, broke off and fled into the woods. Balin, his immediate foe gone, made a swift, tactical decision. He turned and retreated the same way as Doreen and Karma, crashing down the cliffside in a shower of dirt and loose stones. Zira saw him coming, grabbing the sleeve of his tunic.
Did everyone make it out?
She asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Before Balin could answer, a sound carried on. The wind caught Zira's attention. A chant in Draconic, the syllables both familiar and alien to her ears. She raised a hand sharply.
Quiet!
The chanting grew louder, and suddenly Zira's mind was filled with the same vision from her dream. The elven girl, bound in coils of smoke, her eyes wide with terror, fixed on Zira.
Zira, don't let me die.
The silent plea echoed in the chambers of her soul. It was followed by the dragon's roar, a sound that now seemed less like fury and more like a response. Zira's head snapped up toward the tower. The great green dragon had heard the chant as well. It was on its perch, its long neck stretched, its head turned toward the source of the sound, listening intently. In that single horrifying instant, Zyra understood. The pieces clicked into place with the cold, terrible finality. The vision, the chant, the dragon's attention. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a lure, a trap, a spell woven by Tiamat's cultists to ensnare the mind of a dragon. The girl wasn't a prisoner in the tower. She was a reflection of her own imagination, her mind's manifestation of the enchantment. Zira, with the dragon blood singing in her veins, had been caught in the net, a random collateral victim of a magic not meant for her.
No,
She whispered. She grabbed the hem of Balin's tunic, her knuckles white.
Did everyone escape?
She asked again, her voice a near shout, raw with dawning horror. Balin shook his massive head.
Elara fell.
The words struck Zira like a physical blow. She staggered back, her mind reeling. She had done this. She had led them here. She had woven a fantasy from a stray thread of magic, a story of a damsel in distress, and convinced them all to charge into the jaws of death. She had begged them, pleaded with them, even the cold, dismissive paladin of Hor. And Karma, gods forgive her, Karma had been right all along. She was a fool, a weak-minded, emotional fool who had mistaken a phantom for a prophecy. The tower was empty. There was no girl. There was never any girl, just a dragon and its rage. And she had led everyone directly into the trap. Ilara's death would be her fault, hers and hers alone. A choked sob escaped her lips. She turned and began to run, crashing back through the undergrowth, branches whipping at her face. She had to save him. She had to undo this. She stumbled through the root-riddled forest, her lungs burning, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. As she broke through the tree line, she saw the green dragon, Venom Fang, rise from the tower roof, wings unfurled as it flew toward the source of the chanting. Zira rushed into the shack, where Ilara lay crumpled against the far wall. She fell to her knees beside him, pressing trembling fingers to his throat, terrified of what she might not find. But there it was, a pulse weak but present. Zira fumbled at her belt, withdrawing her last healing potion with shaking hands. She tilted his head back and poured the shimmering liquid between his parted lips. Ilara's eyes fluttered open, glazed and unfocused. He attempted to rise, but Zira gently pressed him back.
Not yet.
She whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears.
I'll make us invisible, and then we'll escape.
She whispered the incantation, feeling the magic take hold as they both faded from sight. She took Ilara's hand in hers.
Come,
she said.
Let's check the tower one last time.
A tiny, desperate spark of hope still flickered in her heart. Maybe she had missed something, a trapdoor, a hidden chamber. The whisper still echoed faintly in the back of her mind.
Don't let me die.
From the ground floor, she scanned the high, crumbling walls, searching for any irregularity, any sign she had missed from above. There was nothing. The tower was, and always had been, an empty shell. Relief at Ilara's survival mingled with bitter disappointment as Zira began guiding him toward the village outskirts, where she assumed the others had fled. They had taken only a few steps beyond the doorway when pain exploded in Zira's mind, a supernova of agony that obliterated all thought.
Don't let me die, Zira!
The scream tore through her consciousness, followed by a sound so terrible it defied description. A final cry of ultimate suffering, abruptly silenced as though cut by a blade. Then blessed nothingness as Zira collapsed to the ground, the invisibility shattered by her loss of concentration. Ilara felt Zira's body go rigid beside him, a moan escaping her lips, then her full weight sag against him. Ilara caught her, easing her to the forest floor. Her face had drained of all color, taking on a ghostly pallor that terrified him. For a moment he thought some curse had struck her down, but the shallow rise and fall of her chest assured him she still lived.
Eli,
he whispered, the name coming unbidden to his lips. He began patting her cheeks gently, his voice growing more desperate with each passing moment.
please wake up. Please, sister.
Minutes passed like hours before Zira's eyes finally opened, wide and unfocused, filled with an unspeakable horror. She saw Ilara's face silhouetted against the gray sky, his mouth moving, but she could not hear his words. The only sound in her universe was the echo of that final scream, repeating over and over, each time cut short by that sickening silence. She saw Ilara, but her mind superimposed the image from her dream, the smoke-wreathed girl, her face a mask of pleading. And with perfect crushing clarity she understood. She had been wrong. So horribly, catastrophically wrong. The cry for help hadn't been a trick to lure the dragon. It had been real. The girl had been real, and that final death scream, still ringing in the ruins of her mind, was the sound of her sacrifice. The Tiamat cultists had fed her to Venom Fang. The dragon had devoured her, and in doing so had lost its freedom, its will bound to the cultists who now controlled it. The girl had died screaming Zyra's name, begging for a rescue that never came. Above them, a roar split the sky. Ilara turned his face upward, as did Doreen, Karma, and Balin from their hiding place. Venom Fang, the green dragon, spiraled into the sky, no longer a wild creature, but a mount, and on its back, astride the mighty creature, as though born to command it, sat a dark-robed cultist, steering it toward the distant sprawl of the Neverwinter wood. Balin spat on the ground.
Dragon bitch's pawns always travel in fives,
he muttered, watching the retreating form with narrowed eyes.
We should have asked where the last two were after we killed the first three, instead of rushing that tower.
Karma stared at the sky in silent contemplation, then turned to the dwarf beside him. His expression was unreadable, locked behind a mask of stern control. As the immediate danger passed, Karma, Doreen, and Balin cautiously made their way back to the tower to retrieve their abandoned packs. They found Ilara crouched beside Zyra, who sat slumped against a tree trunk. Her eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing.
What happened to her?
Doreen asked, crouching to peer into Zyra's face. Ilara shook his head.
I don't know. She just fell.
We should search the tower,
Balin said pragmatically.
Might be something worth taking.
Karma remained by the door, standing guard while Doreen and Balin ventured inside. Doreen's rogue instincts told her the dragon must have a hoard somewhere nearby. Such creatures didn't make lairs without treasures to protect. Her persistence was rewarded when they discovered a concealed compartment beneath a loose flagstone containing a solid iron chest. Doreen worked the lock with practiced fingers, and when the lid finally swung open, she couldn't suppress a gasp of delight. Thousands of coins gleamed in the dim light, gold, silver, and copper, alongside ornate goblets, magical scrolls, and an ancient dwarven axe of exquisite craftsmanship. A broad, genuine grin split Doreen's face.
Well, well,
She laughed, the sound echoing in the hollow tower.
we didn't come here for nothing after all.
She scooped up a handful of gold pieces, letting them rain through her fingers.
And we didn't even have to kill the beast. We got the treasure just by walking through the front door.
She was giddy, her fear forgotten, replaced by the warm, simple comfort of immense wealth. Her good humor was infectious as she divided the spoils, each pocketing their share with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Even Balin cracked a rare smile as he examined the dwarven axe, running reverent fingers along its runic engravings. As they divided the loot, Karma kept his watch, but his gaze kept drifting back to the woman sitting against the tree. Zyra hadn't moved. She just stared blankly into the distance, unresponsive even when Ilara offered her a water skin. Karma wondered what had broken inside her. She had sworn with such fire and conviction that a girl was in danger, but there had been no one. Had she lied? Had she intentionally manipulated them, sending them into that suicidal charge for some reason he couldn't fathom? Or had she merely been deceived, a victim of her own overwrought imagination? He shook his head, his lip curling slightly. He knew well the emotional hysteria that afflicted women, their tendency toward fantasy and melodrama. Sildar had warned him about Zyra's instability, her willingness to follow feelings rather than facts. Why had he allowed himself to be swayed by her pleas?
Fool me once,
he thought, his hand unconsciously tightening on the hilt of his sword.
shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
The old saying echoed in his mind as he watched her vacant expression. They would need to have words about this incident, about her reckless endangerment of the entire party. But now was not the time. They had survived against all odds, and even gained treasure for their troubles. Retribution would come later. It always did.
Kreidop trennen, lysgyn tan, an y ffilmen gweithias bryn o'r gorwedd